Well, it's Kim Renshaw from the Packaging Forum, and she's looking at the emergent issue of PFAS in packaging. What is it? What do we do about it? Kim, thanks for your time.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just sharing my screen. Right, how's that for everybody?
Yeah, that's great, and full screen. Yeah, perfect.
Wonderful. I've got the benefit of having two screens. I'm very lucky. And I've got the chat up as well, so feel free to pop the chat or the Q&A as we go along. So I'm going to stop looking at the chat, lots of things in there. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about my work on the PFAS Technical Advisory Group for the Packaging Forum. But I want to touch on the Compostable Packaging Technical Advisory Group's work as well before we crack into the PFAS issue. So basically, I would be here talking about compostable packaging tags work, but PFAS has derailed our work slightly, and we will be in a position to talk more about compostable packaging within the next couple of months, but at the moment we're progressing work on PFAS, which is why we're here. But we had some fantastic discussions during the break about biomaterials as well. So basically, just to touch on what we've done so far with the compostable packaging work, we've engaged with a lot of stakeholders, and we established a technical advisory group in 2020. And the idea of the tag was to sort of investigate these issues and sort of the issues that Cameron alluded to as well with the compostable packaging system, the fact there isn't collections and processing en masse around New Zealand. And the tag's job was to investigate the validity of resolving those issues. So we sort of worked through a series of steps, and now we're working on the PFAS stuff. So sort of identified our stakeholders and worked with everybody to figure out a bit of an estimation of the material in the market. So we're sort of estimating about 4,000 to 6,000 tonnes per annum, but it is predominantly fibre in the system currently in New Zealand. So we did a use case consultation as well with all the stakeholders. We received 60 submissions from the other industry groups as well, and there was some really strong support for a use case for compostable packaging that is connected to food and nutrients. So the purpose of compostable packaging is to bring nutrients to composters or to compost for processing and turning into a nutrient-rich soil product, soil addition. So when we had a little comment in the lunch breakout room, it was sort of around those mailers. I'd be saying, hey, look, mailers don't really fit the use case for compostable packaging. You need to go and talk to Rebecca from Better Packaging about looking at reusable options, because they would probably be further up the waste hierarchy and they wouldn't fit compostables. Since then, we've also had a really great in-depth consultation with composters in conjunction with waste bins. We've been talking about, hey, look, if we were going to resolve these issues, what do you need us to do as industry? What do you need us to resolve to be able to progress designing a system together, maybe for something like product stewardship? So we've had 2 hui so far, and they've been really fantastic. And then also been working with all the sort of existing bespoke one-off sort of collections and service providers that are picking up maybe from cafes and commercial settings. There are some send-back schemes happening as well, not en masse and not that big at the moment, but sort of putting everything together. And I'll be producing a report for the Packaging Forum before the end of this financial year, which is end of March, and we'll be talking more about what they can do next for compostable packaging. But to talk a little bit more about what happened with PFAS, basically I say it was still in 2020, at the end of 2020, it was first alerted to this issue of PFAS potentially being in fibre packaging. And so fibre packaging, other types of packaging as well. Sorry, got my screens all mixed up here. So this additive that we've sort of been alerted to is per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS are what they're called. Sometimes they're called fluorine, fluorinated substances, and we're talking about a big class of chemicals here, or chemical compounds. Maybe about 4,700 of them is the estimate most people within industry are working to. We're talking about a range of applications here. Food packaging is only one of them. There's many things that's in non-stick cookware, the Teflon, your waterproof outerwear, so shoes, carpets, upholstery, anything that's really marketed as stain-proof in that upholstery world, and many other applications, probably in the mascara that I just popped on. And there's certainly an emerging base of evidence around the different types of applications that PFAS are being used in, and also as more testing and investigations coming about. So our CTAG, early on, we commissioned a report into PFAS and compostable packaging, and then we sort of started working on investigating all of the TAG members' own supply chains as well, so we could start to get a grasp on whether this really was an issue in the New Zealand market, and also where it was being used or why it was being used. We found that PFAS is really excellent at giving a barrier property, so it repels oil and moisture, and it's been used in packaging for decades. But PFAS are becoming more regulated in different parts of the world, so there's more and more emerging evidence that they just don't break down at all. And we're talking about them having studied maybe a few of these 4,700 chemicals, but treating the entire set of PFAS compounds as a class and saying, well, it would take us too long to study all of the PFAS in the class. We're going to take what it is for a few and apply that across the whole class. So they are what we call ubiquitous. They'll be in you, they'll be in me, they'll be in all around us in the air, and they are everywhere. But and they are in packaging that is promoted as compostable. So maybe packaging that's assumed compostable, and as well as some other packaging types as well, because it's really good for that grease, as I mentioned, and they call it lipophobic and hydrophobic. So really getting down to the nuts and bolts, PFAS are, well, sort of, I would say the science isn't settled, but it is very strongly suggesting that all PFAS are pretty toxic in terms of ecotoxicity and also mammalian toxicity as well. So we're talking about migrating of this PFAS potentially from the food packaging into food. The PFAS could, or the fluorine could be in the food as well, because it could have just been there in the food system as well. There's sort of, I guess we're talking about the things that it can do in humans, sort of immune system disorders, which is very important that we're talking about that now in the world of COVID. Lots of fertility issues coming about, cancer, learning difficulties, particularly in children, and obesity as well. So, and also can be really toxic to plants and animals. So PFAS that are also present during manufacturing process could also make its way into food packaging as well as very, very low levels as a NIAS. NIAS is non-intentionally added substance. So we do have a little bit of an understanding of sort of how much PFAS is an issue. It's generally accepted globally that 100 parts per million in food packaging is sort of the baseline level, that below that you would consider that it's a not intentionally added substance, and above that is an intentionally added substance. But I don't think the science is 100% settled on that. That's just what industry are working to globally. So yeah, there are a variety of ways that people can be exposed to the chemicals, and different levels of exposure as well. So yeah, it could be the food packaging, it could be the equipment that's used, PFAS, so it could be that there's, say, Teflon used on processing machine, it could be used as a processing aid. There's lots of different ways that it can be in the packaging system, but I guess what we're focusing on as a tag right now is PFAS that is intentionally added to food packaging to produce an oil and moisture barrier content. So I think it is important to talk about what's happening around the world, and that part of the work that our tag has been doing is having a really good look at what's happening globally in different areas. So I guess the ABI and the BPI are two compostable packaging industry bodies that have certifications around compostable packaging. So it's the Australian Bioplastics Association and the Biodegradable Products Institute in the States. So they won't allow products that have intentionally added PFAS to use their label, and so their benchmark again is 100 parts per million. Lots of the global, those fast food chains like Wendy's have announced that they'll do a North American phase out in 2022. McDonald's will do a global phase out by 2025. So the big guns have sort of said that they'll work on it, but the real issue that we face is they need an alternative to be able to use if you want to continue to use fibre. So our report found sort of sufficient evidence to suggest that we would investigate what was feasible in terms of potentially phasing it out of food packaging, and that's what we're investigating at the moment as a tag. Just in terms of the sort of leading regulations or leading legislators or leading global forces in this, the states is really pushing. They're pushing faster than everybody else. So they have federal sort of level discussions, as well as a lot of state level regulations. So lots and lots of different states across the United States are working on individual legislation, and I think you can see some examples where they've moved too fast, and now they're trying to. We've got some potentially regrettable substitutes, and that's what we want to avoid, right? We don't want to avoid companies moving to an additive that's potentially worse. So I think it's really a good idea to take our time and make sure that what we're doing with moving to something else is a better substitute. But just to point out that in Europe, Denmark did ban it from food packaging, and the rest of the EU is looking at bans on PFAS across the board. So other applications, not just food packaging, and really looking at only using it in essential use. So in terms of our compostable packaging systems design, we were looking to, solve these problems with compostable packaging and get compostable packaging collected and processed. PFAS is a real issue for us because with there being so much sort of PFAS and potentially some of the compostable packaging, we really need to look at getting it out of the compostable packaging for the composters to want to take that. And so, yeah, we've established this dedicated tag, which is a cross-industry tag, and it's got different government departments on there, as well as the other lots of members and Crown Research Institutes as well. So looking at how do we progress a work program to working towards a phase out and investigating what does the phase out mean, how quickly can we do it, and what alternatives are there, and how would we test for PFAS as well. So we're also working with the other key stakeholders, the other industry bodies, saying, look, as everybody comes forward with more questions about PFAS, because I have to say there's more questions than answers at this point, we need to make sure we're not confusing people, and we've got some really good information to share. And yeah, the biggest thing, the first thing everybody says is, well, what packaging is it in? Is it in my packaging? Is it in this packaging that I'm holding on to in front of me? And the thing is, we don't know the answer to that yet. But so basically, to give you the short answer, I'm doing a webinar in 2 weeks' time to go through everything in more detail with our findings, and we're producing a really great resource for people to be able to disseminate the information from our most recent literature review. So literature review is sort of 50 to 60 pages, and it's a long report, it's long and technical, but it goes through all the details and all the evidence that's sort of come out in the last couple of years. And I should point out that studies are released every week on PFAS, not just in food packaging, but certainly all the different elements of it. And so there's a lot of information to wade through. Our tags next work after this is really start looking at alternatives. At the moment, we're pretty clear on maybe testing protocols and what are the best ways to test food packaging for PFAS or for total fluorine, and we'll be looking to sort of maybe start to get some conversations going further up the supply chain to start to put a bit of pressure back on kind of the global manufacturers to understand where PFAS is being added first, and then maybe look at testing, doing some testing protocols after that. So yeah, it's a very complicated kettle of fish, and I have to say I'm very passionate about this now, particularly because once we can get the PFAS situation resolved, particularly in compostable packaging, but certainly in all of the other packaging types as well, we can really move forward with compostable packaging in New Zealand. And so and composters could have some assurance that it wasn't going to be contaminating their soils. So our tags, the next steps, as I mentioned, is I do have a webinar coming up in 2 weeks. And I think after that, this alternatives piece is really interesting. We had a big discussion on coatings in our breakout room at lunchtime. There's more questions than answers again when it comes to the rest of the coatings. There's the water-based barrier coatings or water dispersion coatings that actually Mark from Scion first spoke about 18 months ago at the recent packaging masterclass here with SBN. So there's a lot of questions about the alternatives, and we really need to get as much evidence as possible on those to be able to provide some innovation discussions through the rest of industry and all the clever people that are working on solutions. So, and with the tag, with the compostable packaging tag, we'll be recommending a path forward with a standard as well in that formal position that Packaging Forum comes up with. And yeah, also just moving forward with, hey, what's the how would we design a system for compostable packaging going forward? And I wanted to present today, but we're just not quite in a position to be able to share all of the details on those, but it won't be too far away. So I think I've got a couple of questions. Do I have questions, Andy?
There is a little bit of discussion going on about studies on PFA content in polymers, but given the comments you made, I'm loath to press you on it because I can understand that there's not hard and fast answers on that. But I don't know if you could comment at all about levels of PFA in particular materials.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Look, there's a lot of literature, but there's a recent study. So you can there's lots of information online as well. When we do, if anybody's a member of Packaging Forum, you'll be able to access the full report. And otherwise, we'll be sharing that other resource. But basically, to answer your questions, it's not really used anywhere where your product already has a barrier. So you wouldn't need to use PFAS as a barrier property for polymer if you've already got that polymer as the barrier. But what we do see is when you're using fluorinated plastics, because it creates a barrier on the inside of the plastic to prevent the product inside from seeping out of the plastic. But it's mainly used in pesticides and those sorts of products. But that is an issue, but it's not an issue for the food packaging that we're working on. We haven't found any evidence of fluorinating like HDPE or anything like that in terms of food packaging application in the literature.
Thanks so much. Thanks for your time. And it reminds me that the cradle to cradle system that kind of branched into the circular economy system was co-founded by a chemist, Michael Braungart, who probably would have seen this one coming from quite some distance. And it gives another example of how our work on packaging is going into the boundaries of other things, into chemistry, into food chemistry, into supply chains, making it a very big and complex kettle of fish. But we're grappling with it and we're making progress. Thanks very much.